Leslie Silverstein has been in private law practice in Portland since 1989 and is now the principal attorney of Maine Immigration Attorneys. Leslie is a member of the Immigrant Legal Advocacy Project's pro bono panel, handling asylum cases on a volunteer basis. In 2014, she was named ILAP Pro Bono Attorney of the Year and is currently serving as ILAP's board president. Leslie has also been a member of the Maine Volunteer Lawyers Project Domestic Violence Pro Bono panel since 2006 and has won several statewide awards for her services. In 2015, Leslie received the American Bar Association's Pro Bono Publico Award, given to only 5 recipients in the nation. Please welcome Leslie Silverstein.
Thank you. It's so nice to see everyone here today. And I also want to echo the thank you for Sam and Ben and Sage, these remarkable young people, for putting on this event. Can we please give them a round of applause? I am made of glass. You know these people, or maybe you are one of these people. We feel everything. We absorb everyone's stories. And the challenge is how not to shatter. I'm going to tell you 2 stories today. One is fact, and one is fiction. In 2010, I read a book. The name of the book is Little Bee. Write it down. You're going to want to read it. This book changed my life. Little Bee was a young Nigerian girl, 14-year-old girl, who ended up in a detention center in England. Now, Little Bee lived in a peaceful village, which, unbeknownst to her, was built on top of an oil field. When Little Bee was in the detention center, she spent most of her time imagining different ways to kill herself. The phrase, this is a phrase that's often repeated in this book, the men came and they. The men came and they. Little Bee's story started with that, and so did every other girl's story in this detention center. So one day, the men came and they killed every man in Little Bee's village. And then, as the women and children were fleeing, they slaughtered the majority of them as well, because they didn't want any witnesses to what they had done. Little Bee and her sister were able to escape, and they hid out in the jungle for about 6 days. At the end of the 6 days, they were found, and Little Bee hid under a canoe and listened to her sister being gang raped and dismembered. Little Bee was able to escape and snuck aboard a ship bound for England. When the ship docked in England, immigration authorities boarded the ship and put her in the detention center, where she spent the next 2 years. Now, I'm not going to tell you any more about the book for a couple of reasons. One, I don't want the images in your head that have been in my head for the past 7 years. But also, you should read the book. It sounds like I'm not exactly pushing the book, but it's a horrifying book, but also an uplifting one. I closed the last page of the book, and I was filled with what I can only describe as a profound outrage that this could happen. How could a girl be imprisoned in a detention center for 2 years for having committed no crimes? How, as Little Bee said, I am a refugee, but you must understand, there is no refuge. And I couldn't believe that this could happen. So I immediately started Googling, I think it was still Google back then, searching to see, are there asylum seekers here? Is there anything, I wonder if I could do anything to help. Does this even exist? And I quickly found ILAP. And I ended up emailing Sue Roach, who back then was the legal director. She is now the incomparable executive director of this organization, but back then she was the legal director. We met and had coffee, and I said to her, I was interested. I had done some pro bono cases for the Volunteer Lawyers Project, some domestic violence cases, but I was interested in finding out more about joining ILAP's pro bono asylum panel. And she said, great, we're always looking for new lawyers, and this is fabulous. And I said, you know, I'd practiced for about 20 or 21 years, but I had not done any immigration cases. And she said, well, that's good. Will you do a training? I said, absolutely. So I did a training in Boston, and shortly thereafter, I got my first case. This first case was a woman from Africa. She worked, I think the closest equivalent we would have is rape counselor. She was a trained psychologist who specialized in helping victims of sexual violence. She worked for various organizations and NGOs, but she also took private clients on the side. So my client was contacted by a grandmother of a small village whose young granddaughter, about a 15-year-old girl, was just raped by police guards. So my client accepted the case, worked on the case with a close colleague who was a nurse, and the nurse was coordinating the victim's medical care, and my client was providing counseling services and also was going to work with the victim to seek justice, to report the crime. So she went with the young victim to report the crime. Shortly thereafter, my client was taken into custody. She was badly beaten. She was threatened. She was told, you will see what this young girl has seen if you don't stop this work. Upon her release, she learned her close friend, the nurse, was murdered. She got home and received a telephone call telling her, we murdered the nurse and you will be next. So she had to flee the country, leaving her husband and her 4 children. So I first met this client, and what immediately struck me, I think for many lawyers, our clients just trust us. We meet them, and it's just an immediate, almost always an immediate bond of trust. But with this particular client, it took a very long time, months and months and months. And I'm sure you've heard about the asylum system. These cases take years. There's a huge backlog. And it took her a very long time working throughout her case and meeting for, I don't even know, countless hours for her to trust me. But her story has so many twists and turns, it would take me 5 hours to explain it to you, but I'm going to just tell you some of them. That on top of the legal complications, there was just also a lot of other drama going on in her story. Not all bad, a lot of it good. So after maybe about a year and a half of her being here, she called me and said, Leslie, I have something important to tell you. Can I see you? I said, sure, come in the office. I'm here. Come by later this afternoon. So she came in and she said, Leslie, my husband is here. I was like, wait, what? She said, well, unfortunately, he was being threatened as well for political activities, and the children were in danger, so we had to put the children in hiding, and now he is here. So I ended up taking his case as well, and we started working on his case to file asylum for him, but totally separate grounds than her. And a few more months went by, and my client was speaking at an event at USM. So I went, and it was very crowded. She gave the most powerful speech. She's an amazing woman. In any event, I'm watching her on the stage and thinking, something's different. Right after her speech, I went up to her and like, hi. And she said, oh, Leslie, as you can see, I am pregnant. And we did not plan this. Of course, we are happy with this new life, but my heart is split in half because of my children still in Africa. I cannot breathe. Now, for those of you who don't do asylum law, which I'm guessing is a lot of you, an interesting, or I don't know if that's the right word, but there's no legal mechanism to get these children here while the case is pending. There's nothing the lawyer can do in the U.S. to get these children here. So, of course, like, this is one of the stories I absorb. Like, oh my God, these children are stuck here. I felt my heart was split in half as well. So she leaves the office, and maybe a couple more months go by. And she calls me again, Leslie, I need to come see you. It is important. Are you there today? I said, sure, come by. Same thing. Come by this afternoon. So she came to my office and she said, Leslie, the children are coming. I was like, wait, what? Yeah. And she said, but we have a problem. We don't have the money for the plane tickets. I said, okay, how much do you need? She said, we need $7,500 because you had to buy round-trip tickets or they would not be able to leave the country. You have to show you were coming back. It ties to your home country. And it was 5 round-trip tickets because we needed to buy one for the relative that was going to accompany the 4 children. I said, okay, $7,500. I said, come back in 2 days. So I emailed all my friends and family and told them the story, and people gave $10, $20, $40 through PayPal, or people mailed checks. I don't even know. People told me they'd give cash. So we were able to raise about half the money in 2 days. And I called her and I said, okay, we have half the money. And she was able to raise the other half. She was very active in her church, and they raised the other half. I said, okay, book the flights, get the children to Logan so she and I could go down, because I was just worried. I knew, even though they were being accompanied by an aunt, I just didn't know what the Customs and Border Patrol would do once they landed in the U.S., and I wanted to be there with my client, just in case. I said, okay, get them to Logan and you and I will go. She said, okay. So then she called, maybe that night, and she said, we could not get them to Logan. They are going to O'Hare. That is the only airport we could get them to. And I said, okay, when? And she said, tomorrow. I said, okay. And she said, Leslie, will you go with me? I said, yes, I will go with you. So I booked flights, just one-way flights, from Logan to O'Hare for my client and myself. And the next morning, my husband took me, and her husband took her, and we all met at the Concord station to take the bus down to Logan. Her husband couldn't go because we hadn't filed his case yet, so I was just too nervous. Even though it was domestic travel, just didn't want to risk it, and he was out of status, so he couldn't go. So we all met at the Concord bus station very, very early in the morning, maybe 5 a.m. Oh, wait, I skipped the part. This part's important. So through the night, of course, I'm tracking the kids' flights, oh my God, I couldn't sleep. God knows, I'm sure she didn't either, obviously. So I remember, not even feeling semi-relaxed, so I could see their flight had landed in Amsterdam. And there, no phone calls, no texts saying they weren't on the flight. It's okay. So then I woke up the next morning, checked their flight. It was perfect. Our flight's going to get to Chicago about an hour before there. That's exactly perfect, exactly what we want. So we all meet at the bus station, and I still have the images. This is several years ago now, but I still have the image in my head of, her and her husband standing there, and me and my husband, just the 4 of us, frozen for a moment in time like that. And I remember just saying to her husband, I'll take good care of her, don't worry, and the next time you see me, I'm going to have your children with me. So we get on the bus, and at this time, she's about 7 months pregnant. And we sit down, it's a funny movie, I think it's even Caddyshack or Overboard, one of those funny 80s movies. And I turn to my client and I say, oh, here, take these headphones. This will be a great distraction for 2 hours. Watch this movie. Oh, Leslie, thank you, I will. Headphones in, sound asleep. So we get to Logan and check the flights again. Our flight's on time, kids' flight's good. Still, we're going to get there hour ahead. It's perfect. Everything's great. So we get on our plane. Same thing, funny movie. I turn to my client. Oh, take these headphones. This will be a great distraction for 2 hours. Thank you, Leslie. Sound asleep. So our flight lands at O'Hare, and turn my phone back on, check the kids' flight. It had made up time in the air. It already landed. So now, I'm swearing in my head. I won't share that with you now, but in my head, I was oh my God, thinking I have to drag this pregnant woman through the airport. I have to get from the domestic terminal to the international. Anyone who's been in O'Hare knows it's the size of a city. So I'm dragging her quickly, and getting on the air train or whatever it is, and we get to the international terminal. And then, you're standing there, and there are those one-way doors on this side, no entry, and the board is showing all the places over here. So we're just waiting and waiting, and I'm just starting to get a little nervous. It's probably 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and I'm looking on the board, and I see other flights have landed after, and I'm just starting feeling oh no, who knows? Are these kids in a detention center already? Are they being held? Are the customs agents questioning them? I don't know. So the doors start opening and people are rushing out. And I just start asking folks. I turn to a man like, "Oh, are you from Amsterdam?" "No, Charles de Gaulle." And a woman, were you on the Amsterdam flight?" "No, Heathrow." So I just realized, okay, I have to do something. And I see like an officer right there, and I turn about to say, is there a way we can go back and talk to some authorities back there? I represent these children. This is my client, their mother. And right when I'm turning to the officer, I hear my client next to me scream, "They're here!" So now I'll tear up probably, but that image of that family being reunited after 2.5 years. It was a 5-year-old boy, a 7-year-old boy, and a 10-year-old girl and a 12-year-old girl. And they all just jumped on their mother. And obviously that is in my head and we'll never leave it. And the way I will always describe that day, and it's funny, it's either 3 or 4 years ago, but it's this exact time of year, it was early December. The way I'd always describe it is my favorite day as a lawyer took place in an airport, not a courtroom. So fast forward about 4 years to where we are now, and the first travel ban that got passed in last January. And then we were seeing in real life what I was afraid of, right? I mean, we're seeing families ripped apart in airports. So I was contacted by a young woman from USM right after that first travel ban. So it was the end of January, I believe. And she said, "I'm organizing a rally at City Hall. Will you speak?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And actually, there were many speakers. But what I always remember from that night was, all the speakers we were, and Mayor Spindling, if he's here yet, I can't see, but he was there. And we were all waiting in City Hall above, and we were just watching the crowd just build and build and build, and it was amazing. They had to shut the streets off, and this young woman that organized it, I can only describe her as a ray of light and hope. It was just, she gave this amazing speech, and the whole thing, I think it ended up being 1,200 people. It's just this sight, an amazing, watching all these people come to speak out against this horrific, clearly discriminatory, just disgraceful order. Yeah, I have no feelings about it now. In any event, fast forward again, about 8 months later, when Travel Ban 2.0 was passed, and the same young woman contacted me and said, "Leslie, will you speak? I'm doing another travel ban rally. Will you speak?" I said, "Absolutely." So this time, this is only about, I think it was October, it might have been September. This time only 30 people showed up. But I have to tell you, it was no less heartfelt. We stood in a circle, and it was mostly young people, high school kids, some college kids, and they were either immigrants themselves or they were speaking out on behalf of their classmates and telling stories, and it was quite moving and powerful. But the next morning, the young woman, the organizer, went on her Facebook page and just expressed disappointment. Like, only 30 people showed up, just explaining she was disappointed. And so one of the comments, I don't know why I read, I made a glass, why am I reading the comments? I don't know, but I did. And one of the comments said, "How dare you attack us for not showing up, and people are busy, and that's not exactly a way to motivate it," and, basically STFU. But it wasn't that comment that stayed with me. It was another comment responding to this comment that said, "No, we have to hear the disappointment. I am one of these individuals that always shows up to these events. I always speak out. I try to do the right thing. I didn't show up to this one because I feel despair, and it is keeping me from going on." And I remember, I think that just taps into what so many are feeling. I know I am feeling. The times, hard to get out of the bed and leave the Kunkat. I'm just like buried in despair is the best way to describe it. But when I feel like that, this is what I think of. The woman whose friend was murdered and who had to leave her husband and children for helping that rape victim seek justice. A man who had to crawl through glass in his living room to get to his wife and young children after a grenade was thrown in his home for speaking out against the government. And a woman who rescued her 9-year-old daughter from kidnappers who were about to force her to undergo female genital mutilation. And then I always think of a couple days after the election, my son, who's here today, but he does live in Manhattan, he called me and said, Mom, he was describing he had just taken part in a demonstration, and he said, Mom, there were thousands upon thousands of us, and we were marching peacefully but steadily up Fifth Avenue toward Trump Tower. He said, Mom, it was a sight to see. And that reminds me, I don't want to die before my death. Do you?